Oh, I am apparently live now. I don't know if anybody is listening, but yesterday I attempted to do the stream, but the internet failed me, and for some reason, I don't know, probably I suspect it's more likely it could be an internet issue, it could be a OBS issue. For some reason, I had my stream like terminate on me twice, and it wasn't really working out, and it's getting kind of late, so we weren't really able to fully cover this subject in full, which is Latin and Greek for theology. So we're going to do that today. We're going to talk probably in a bit more of an ordered way than I was yesterday, but we're going to cover that same topic. So today we're going to talk about, well, how do I learn Latin and Greek for theology? And I think first of all it's probably important to explain why such a thing is basically necessary, because I believe it is necessary for at least a lot of people. And I think that, I think a good 100 years ago it was fairly normal for educated people to know Latin, at the very least, if not Greek. And so I'd like to start at the beginning here by talking about why it's really quite an important thing to do. So the first reason is that the entire Orthodox, that is Roman Catholic, I suppose you could include the Eastern Christians in these traditions as well, and a lot of much later works. Almost the entire thing is in Greek or Latin, right? So if you want to go and read the Church Fathers in their original languages, in the very beginning, almost all of them are writing in Greek. The New Testament is written in Greek. The Old Testament that they were working out of to a large extent was written in Greek, and over time it starts to increase in terms of Latin, but really you don't get much vernacular theology until relatively recently. And even amongst academia generally, you don't really have much in the way of vernacular works before the Renaissance, which is the 15th century. You've got huge swaths of Greek and Latin, especially Latin in the Middle Ages and Greek in antiquity. So I think we have something like 90 million words worth of Greek from the antique period, and about 9 million from Latin. But Latin begins to explode and is very important because it is the language of Western theology, and really it's the language of these are the languages of culture generally speaking. Before I've written 1650 here, I mean there are exceptions. There are going to be Dante's Inferno. There's going to be works that are on the that actually were on the index, like Boccaccio. That is the man who was the source for Chaucer. All of these cultural artifacts, or not all of them, but like a significant chunk of them, are going to be written in Latin and Greek, and they'll probably be the most represented languages that you can find in really any field, scientific, rhetorical, legal. These languages are the bedrock of Western civilization, simply put, with some inputs from other languages. So you have a little Hebrew here, you have some Syriac there, you have the vernacular languages. These are important, especially coming into the modern era. German, French, English are really important. But we're probably that's for another stream. Learning French and German is probably going to be a more trivial task than learning, at the very least, Greek. I wouldn't be surprised if Latin is of a similar difficulty to modern German, personally. But that's my opinion. That's my opinion. And then another reason, which I think is really not talked about as much as it should be, is that because you're going to be beginning when you're learning these things, probably I think it would be advisable to start with works that have already been translated, such as the Bible and stuff like that. It forces a person to read a lot more slowly, because you're not going to be as skilled at Greek and Latin as you are at probably English or whatever your mother tongue is. And so this is going to force you to read more slowly, and you can use this as an opportunity to focus more on the meaning. So there are certain things that I learned reading through the New Testament in both Greek and Latin that I didn't notice in English. So for example, the container for the chunks of bread at the feeding the 4,000 and the feeding of the 5,000, the word is different. For example, there's an ambiguity in the Greek in Matthew, which leads to an exegetical problem where the Douairimes and the King James version of the Bible will disagree with more modern interpretations. And from what I've seen of more analytical commentaries, that is commentaries that really get into the depths of the Greek, There's kind of an ambiguity over the question, and you can only notice these sorts of things. These sorts of things that are often can be quite important. Like, these can shoot down atheist objections quite simply, actually. Some of them anyway, if you have the original language right there in front of you, right? And it also gives a higher definition to what a person is trying to say, because languages, unlike some people might think, they don't just switch 100%. You don't just go one to one that they've just switched out the words, and like that's not how languages work. So, for example, if I was to take, hopefully this doesn't shake the web, yeah, if it shake the webcam, like the New Testament in here, this is an ESV, right? It's pretty representative of the Greek. Is it worded exactly as the Greek is worded? No, because Greek has a lot of ways of saying things which are different from English, and it's the same with Latin, right? Like verbs change form a lot more commonly than they do in English. And so it gives more representation. Like what greater representation can you have for what an author is saying than what the author actually wrote? Some could dispute this over the New Testament, but for certain things like St. Augustine or something like that, I don't think anybody's going to dispute that Augustine was writing in Latin. And then finally, and probably the biggest reason, is that it's going to give you access to all of these texts that are untranslated as well, if you're good enough at it. So I read through, as I've gone on many times on this channel about, I've been reading the Old Testament commentaries of Cornelius a Lapide, and they aren't translated into English. I couldn't do that if I didn't know Latin, right? So why exactly would you actually listen to me when it comes to this? Why are you even here? Like, I'm just some normie, right? Well, because I can read Latin to some extent. I can manage with the scriptures and some of the theologians. I can't read absolutely everything. I'd say I'm at like a lower intermediate level, meaning that I can read good chunks of text and get the gist of them without a dictionary. So if I have I don't know, like a chunk of Augustine or something, depending on what he's written, I can often get the gist of what is being said. That doesn't mean that I know all the moving parts, but I can get a pretty good grasp on it. So I've got past the beginner stage, and I'm somewhat into the intermediate stage. As for Greek, I've made my way through a decent amount of Greek as well. Like, I'm nowhere near as good at Greek as I am at Latin, but I'm making progress quite solidly, and I can understand a decent amount. Like, I've read 3 of the 4 Gospels in Greek with a reader's edition. We'll go on to those in a minute. I've read Genesis. I'm currently working through this, which we'll get into, which is a textbook. But I have some idea of how this language learning stuff works. So what exactly should our aim be when we are learning Latin and Greek for theology? So, like, we have an idea of reasons why. We know, I've hopefully given you some idea of where I am to say this. So I'm not some 19th century scholar who can fluently read ancient Greek. I'm not. I'm not that fluent in Latin, but I can make my way, right? So what do we actually want to be able to achieve? Well, as far as I'm concerned, if you are interested in learning Latin and Greek for theology, aside from, maybe you're doing a PhD or something like that, what you're probably going to want to do is take any Latin and Greek text and read it without difficulty. So that would mean you'd probably want to know about 95 to 98% of the words that you're going to come across in any given text. So, this is based on research that I actually didn't say for this, but generally when people are talking about what they call realistic reading, which is, reading that you can realistically pick up and read, they're talking about 95%. And if they're talking about extensive reading, which is where you're reading it like with even less difficulty and you've only got the odd word here and there that you need to know, that's 98%. So we're going to be aiming for, in this, getting to that kind of level, and that's going to take some time. So there's a couple of methodologies that I want to talk about in relation to this. So actually, someone said something in the comments I'd like to respond to. I know St. Augustine never truly got the hang of Koine Greek, despite it being a common language in the Roman Empire at that time. Well, you see, I've heard that St. Augustine actually translated part of a contemporary theological text at the time called the Panarion by Saint Epiphanius of Salamis, I believe. So when it says that St. Augustine never truly got the hang of Koine Greek, it wasn't at least if this is true, I think I heard this on Christian Wagner streams. When he got the hang of Greek, he was still fluent enough to be able to read like a complicated text in it. That's more than, frankly, most classics graduates can nowadays. So, like he wasn't like a complete, like he wasn't a dunce that didn't understand Greek, but his Latin like massively excelled as Greek, and he didn't like Greek either. So going back to methodologies, there's two figures who are often talked about, who really should be talked about. So there's Stephen Krashen, who was this second language acquisition academic, who's famous for. I mean, he had a number of theories. He had 5 theories in his when it came to talking about second language acquisition. But the one that he's really famous for is called the Inut Hypothesis, which essentially states that the way that you pick up a language is by receiving input that is one level higher than the previous work that you read. So he doesn't actually, as far as I know, he doesn't quantify what this additional level is. But his fears are basically that these languages especially are candidates for this problem. Actually, there's a lot of focus on grammar in standard education. If you are doing an AP in Latin, if you're American, or you're doing a GCSE or A level, you're going to probably have a textbook like you'll often have a textbook like Wheelock. Now, Wheelock is a textbook that just walks you through the grammar rules and teaches you them, and then you have to translate sentences, right? Now, he's going to say that this isn't actually learning the language, because the language itself has something called an implicit mental representation. I've heard it called, where basically you sort of intuit the language, and you gain this intuitive sense of the language by reading. And this is quite important. I think it's probably somewhat true, but this is where I'm going to bring in the second methodology, because I think that for the sake of people who are specifically looking to read in ancient Greek and Latin, like taking the approach of which follows from this, which is just reading a hell of a lot, is extremely helpful, but it's not the full enchilada, right? So you're going to be able to read and understand a lot of text, but there's a lot of nuances that aren't as immediately obvious, and I think that would take time to develop. Whereas if you have some kind of understanding of the grammar, if you come to a tricky bit, I mean, especially if you're not you can forget reading Greek if you have no access to a bilingual text and you don't have maybe you could with actually I wouldn't touch an interlinear. You might get confused. It would be a serious struggle to learn Latin or Greek without explicit grammar instruction, I think. It might work for something like Spanish or for Portuguese, which are grammatically quite similar to English. But for Latin and Greek, I think it would very much benefit people to learn grammar explicitly. And the reason for this is because I can't remember if this is Krashen that says this, but the argument typically runs that you're not applying grammar rules when you're talking, and that's true. But you're not even going to be able to make a beginning on Greek and maybe even Latin. Like Latin, I mean, it's been a while since I've learned that. I think you have to do a lot of grammar study for or maybe not a lot, but you need to do some sort of grammar study for Greek and Latin to be able to make a start, right? And this is where I think a more sensible academic comes in, called Paul Nation, and he talks about there being 4 strands. He can't actually prove any kind of connection to them, but these are 4 things that the literature on second language acquisition shows works, right? So these aren't going to work in isolation, right? So if you simply were to just read and listen to lots of things, that would eventually work. Like reading is extremely important, but there are other things as well that are very, very helpful. And he talks about 4 different things. I think I put the link in the description already if you want to read the paper that I've posted. So he talks about 4 different strands, and this is how I'd recommend approaching any kind of study. Like, this is going to be kind of abstract initially. So the first thing is language focused study, which is grammar. I mean, some people use Anki, and what they'll do is they'll have the word on one side and the English meaning on the other. I've had limited success with this. I think for some things it's probably quite helpful, but you have to do it really with, I think even like Paul Nation might actually explicitly recommend this. You need to do this with some sort of text there that has the words in it as well. So you can't just go and type in, find like the top 1,000 most common words in Greek and just learn them. It doesn't work like that. You need to say take the Gospel of Matthew. You click in the words that that might occur more than 20 times, and then you learn that as you're reading Matthew. Right, that's a much better way of doing it than just learning the words in isolation. Like, you can go through. In fact, I went through the top 1,000 words in Latin and did memorize with them for quite a while, and I just sort of blistered through them. I retained one word. I think it's Paulus, like a single word, and I spent days doing that. Don't do Anki in that kind of way. If you're going to do it with some text that already has the words in it. That's the first thing. The second one is meaning-focused input, which is what we've just described. This is the comprehensible input, the input hypothesis, where you read texts that slightly challenge you, and then you sort of grow into the language. And this is going to be something that you're going to spend the majority of your time doing, I think. And I think it's probably good that way, because that's really what we want to do. We want to be reading in Latin or Greek. We're going to be reading stuff that's just created by authors trying to teach first, but eventually we're going to make our way to things that really matter in a more in a more theologically minded way. The third thing he talks about is meaning focused output, which I think is actually quite important here. The reason for this being that I think that one of the this is just a community-wide thing. The reason why Latin and ancient Greek are hard to learn, especially ancient Greek, is because there aren't enough people speaking it, which sounds like a really stupid thing. It's like, well, I'm reading it. Why would that matter? And the reason is that if you can only read, you have to sit down and actually read it. But if you have someone who's already spoken it, then you can stick it in your ears. And if you're going down to a Walmart or Tesco or Asda, as we have in the UK, or wherever you are, you can have the text blaring through your ears, and that is going to teach you the language as well. And you can just do it in off times. Like, you don't have to be sat down here with a book all the time. You can just have the audio in your ears. So if we're able to output in a way that is good, you're going to be helping the community to actually develop an understanding, because like listening will develop your ability with the language in the same way that reading will. I mean, at least with Latin, being exposed to a lot of listening to Latin has taught me certain things. So and with Greek it's a bit more, I think it's a bit more alien, the accent that it's spoken with, at least if you're using modern Greek pronunciation. But nonetheless, it frees a person up to do other things if they have somebody speaking the language to them. It may even help other areas of the language, but I don't have any sort of research to confirm this. I'd be shocked if speaking it didn't improve your ability to read it. And then finally there's fluency development, which is basically where you do the things that the other things more quickly. So you do the things that are involved in the language itself more quickly. So you learn to, for example, read a text more quickly. So you might be like struggling through reading like 40 words a minute or something like that. Try and get it to 100. That would be a fluency development task, and you'd be doing this with a text you already know. You might be listening through text quite slowly, but you might increase the speed on the recording. I think this is also something that might be helpful. He would say at least up to the speed that a native speaks at, right? I imagine that something like this would also be very helpful for speaking as well, for those who are going to be speaking it. Also, another thing as well is that if you know these languages, nobody else around you is going to know them. So if you need to communicate information to somebody else who knows it, so say you've got a wife or something, and there's some drunk causing a problem on the train, if you can turn to your wife in Latin and tell them that there's a drunk causing issues, then that could actually be something that's quite useful at times. So if you want to read more about Paul Nation's approach to this, it's in the description. But we're going to move on to actually how to do it. So I'm going to start with some tips, and then I'm going to start getting into the real crunch in it. So like, this is going to take a while, right? So it's going to take probably going to take you a couple years each. So I mean, I am now I took a month-long break in December, but I've been learning, like I've learned 99.5% of my Greek, aside from the alphabet, since the end of September last year. and I'm in a position where I can read through a lot of the Old and New Testaments with readers' editions, which we'll get into in a moment. But I'm far from fluent. Latin took me quite a long time, but that was much more because of my own lack of discipline. I think if you already have a habit of being able to sit down for an hour and a half and do something consistently, I think that you could see very good results with Latin in a year. So if you're able to sit down an hour and a half a day, that's call it 500 hours. If you're able to do that, I can see you being able to read through most easier level text by the end of that. So you could pick up, a homily of St. Augustine, maybe, depending on the subject. You could certainly pick up the Summa or the Vulgate extremely quickly. Like I'm talking more about like Augustine. You could probably pick up. You could pick up maybe translations of. I've seen in the Office of Readings they'll sometimes go through St. Cyril of Jerusalem's catechetical lectures. I think, or it might have been Cyril of Alexandria. Like they weren't too bad. Some of the homilies of Saint Hilary of Poitiers in Latin, they weren't too bad. Although some of them are really hellish. You can get quite a lot done in a year in Latin. Also, just while I'm on the topic, if you have no particular preference for Latin or Greek, pick Latin first because Latin's easier. It's a lot closer to English. You've already got a lot of the words known from English, and it's less grammatically complicated. Don't try to get 100% comprehension when you sit down and read something, because this is going to be a lot of reading. Try to get a good understanding. Like if you've got the odd word here and there, don't sweat it, because you'll come across them. You'll often come across them later on. Unless obviously you're doing some theological study and you're trying to figure out exactly what an author is saying. In which case, ignore me. But I'm talking about I want to just get a grasp of this language. Like don't fret over single words, right? You're interested in the words that occur more often, because the more words that you know in a sentence, the better you're going to be able to comprehend that sentence. And so, if a word is only occurring once, then don't worry about it. Read and listen. So, as I've said before, listening is more efficient than reading because people speak quicker than you can read generally. So you can probably, I think I sat down and calculated this. I think you can with there's these New Testament recordings for the Latin, for the Vulgate, and I calculated the amount of words per hour you get as about 6,000. Whereas sitting down, I found that I could read and get about 4,000. So if you're getting 6,000 in, that means you're getting a greater amount of language going through you, and so you're going to learn it quicker. So a lot of this comes down to the fact that you want to listen to words multiple times in context in order to learn them, because you can learn words a lot better in context than you can in in Anki or something like that. So because words in a certain context will often only take one or two, or maybe often take one or a couple of meanings, whereas if you're just looking at the definition for through in English or in, these words, a lot of these words have various meanings. They certainly do in Greek and Latin, whereas if you're seeing them in a particular context, it's likely they've only got one of those meanings, and then you just read that word over and over again, you get to know the different meanings. It's also very easy to get burnt out. Like I don't think people quite appreciate this. It's quite a tedious task. Even doing this, even reading, rather than like going through grammar rules and stuff like this, it can be quite tedious because you're going to be reading a lot of beginner textbooks, especially with Greek, for quite a while, and so you should probably try and vary things out. You should still learn the content reasonably well, but if you feel like you're going to actually like seriously burn out, I'd switch over. But on the other hand, I also wouldn't stray too much from the material that you're already reading, because there's a concept called narrow reading, which is going to be very helpful, which is basically you read inside of a particular topic so that you gain a mastery over the subject-specific vocabulary, and then that means that you're better able to see, you're going to have a better level of comprehension of each sentence, because you're going to have more of the words known. And so rather than, say you're reading St. Augustine, you get burnt out on Augustine, don't go and read Pliny the Elder. Go and read, St. Hilary of Poitiers, or go and read maybe someone, maybe like Aquinas or something, right? Like, try and stay within the bounds of theology as much as you can. And also, don't be afraid to check a translation, because you're ultimately aiming for understanding, and if something can help you understand, then, go ahead. So, with all that said, I would now like to talk about how you would do things in order with Latin. So, I'm going to see if I can share my screen very quickly. Hopefully, this isn't going to break anything. So, if I go to window capture, and I go here, let's see. Yeah, here we go. Alright, so I have here a reading list for Latin beginners texts from a guy called Justin Learns Latin. This will all be in the comment section, or in the main section under the stream. And this gives you a fairly good layout of different texts to read. Now, I don't fully agree with him. Maybe that's not true. I think you don't have to obey this as strictly as he's put it. So here's what I would recommend doing with this. What you do is you do this up here. I think this is necessary. So you go through this. This is Lingua Latina Persi Illustrata, a Familia Romana, which is a book which introduces you to Latin. It's basic Latin. And then you have Colloquia Personarum, which is accompanying discussions that enter around some of these chapters described here. And then you've got Fabelle Latinae, which stands for which are Latin fables, which I don't think I've actually read. I feel like they sound familiar though. And then you have down here these lovely streams these lovely playlists that somebody called Carla Hurt made on YouTube, and she's basically collected a whole load of Latin audio together, and you can sit and listen through it, and it will teach you, and it's great. I think these are really, really quite helpful. They're also a lot bigger than what's indicated here. And then you have the other things down here. I've read all of these. They're okay. I think that they cost money to read, but I mean a lot of these do. So basically, you can basically make your way through this, I think, and then you're going to be in a position where you're ready to pick up the Vulgate. So the Vulgate, for those who don't know, is the Latin edition of the Scriptures, and it's actually very important for theological study because most of the medieval theologians are going to be relying on some kind of Vulgate. And so are later theologians. So, like, having a grasp of the Vulgate is going to be quite helpful. Now, I have here a list of the Vulgate books in order of their difficulty. So this was this indicates like roughly how many words you need to know from the Vulgate in order to read these very comfortably. But like it doesn't really matter that much. You can normally figure out what's going on quite well if you have a copy of the Duo Reams. And so this basically gives you a sort of delineation of difficulty. So these first few books that are on the easier end are 1 John, Haggai, 1st and 2nd John even, the Gospel of John, and 2 Kings. And then you have another set of them as well down here. You got Zephaniah. Actually, this might be the... Let me see. Sorry, I might have accidentally put in... I'm not sure, actually. I might have actually... No, actually, I don't know. Sorry, I'm wondering if this isn't the Greek, actually. I don't think it is. Let me check the Greek, because I might have made a mistake copying this across. No, I think it's the Latin, because there's 74 here. Yeah, and then you've got this next lot. I'm not sure what SA1 and SA2 are exactly. This might be a variation from the sacred, I think I got it from sacredtext.com, this text. So you've got Zephaniah, Zechariah, 1 Thessalonians, or I might just be forgetting my books of the Bible. Revelation, Psalms. Psalms is nice, very easy. Matthew, Mark. I mean, in Latin, John was a lot easier than Mark, but I read Mark first. But like for Greek, they'll often recommend Mark. Luke as well is in here. Luke is a harder text, I think. And then you've got, I think this is Jonah. And then you've got Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and 2nd Chronicles. And then you make your way down these. Like, you don't have to pick them in any particular order, but I think it's good to have some idea of order, because if you start, for example, in like wisdom, you're going to get absolutely creamed. Like I can't even read, I can't read wisdom that well. Like I've read it once with English facing translation, and the grammar's just too difficult for me, right? And another one that was really difficult was Second Maccabees, right? Hard books. Like this is going to give you a general overview. It's not going to be completely like a perfectly accurate depiction of it, but it's going to give you a fairly good idea. So like you've got I don't know what this one is. I think this is. So let me go through here. So you've got 1 John, Haggai, Jeremiah, John, 1 Kings, Luke, Malachi, and then you work your way down to Acts of the Apostles. Acts of the Apostles was quite difficult, I found. Amos, Baruch, 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles is probably an easier one. And then you've got Corinthians books here. 1 Corinthians was easy. 2 Corinthians was absolutely brutal. It's brutal in English, to be fair, as well. I don't know. That's probably one of the ones where the algorithm I wrote fails. Daniel, not too bad. Exodus, not too bad. Genesis, not too bad. So then you basically work your way through these. Like start from the top. Have some sort of like choices. Like it's fine to choose different things, but try and keep it on the easier side if you're going to start that way. And at the same time as you're doing this, you should probably be listening to a few podcasts. So I'm going to quickly stop sharing that window. And so these would be works like I recommend Satura Langs. She's great. She's got these beginner level podcasts where she talks through the authors of classical Rome, and they're very interesting, I find. Another one as well, Literae Christianae, which is a set of videos by a Brazilian priest talking about different things in Latin. Another one as well, if you're comfortable with quite crude and unpleasant jokes at times. They're not that common. Like I can only remember 2 of them. There was one about Cato the Elder's genitals, and there was another one about Seneca killing himself. There's also Quomodo dicitur as well. But yeah, be aware of the content not being so. It's also very very kind of cringe. But if you listen through it, that's going to give you a hell of a lot of stuff to listen to, and then you're going to get more input in your mind, and that means you're going to be better at the language. And then when you're done with that, you don't have to go through the whole Vulgate, but you can, you'll get a lot from going through that, and that'll eventually get you to a step where you can start with easier theological writers. Like you could probably read at the same time as this St. Thomas. St. Thomas Aquinas is at least in my experience extremely easy for the Summa. I read a tiny little bit of St. Bonaventure's life of St. Francis of Assisi in Latin, and that was more difficult than the Summa, but it still wasn't that awful. Generally I would stick to authors that have a reputation for being easier. Like you might struggle through the easier Latin, like a classical Latin text, like those from Caesar. Cornelius Nepos is recommended. An earlier one that was recommended was, I want to say it's Lucius Nepos, but I don't think that was actually his name. He wrote what's known as an epitome, so like a summary of Livy's history. What was his name? Florus Nepos. That's it. Florus Nepos. He was a staple of schools. Another book as well that would be, you could probably read biblical commentaries, quite not too bad. You could probably look at, if you want to, the Glossa Ordinaria, which was medieval commentary on the scriptures. Lapidae isn't too bad. I'm basically talking about my level now at this point. You could also read, I read a summary of St. Alphonsus Liguori's Moral Theology, but to be honest, my Latin isn't good enough to get a complete understanding of it. Like if you pick something where you can get the gist and it'll be fine, then that's all right. But if you're going to be reading like moral theology, and you might get stung with scrupulosity because your Latin's not going to be good enough to 100% understand it. Another thing as well, the Office of Readings is bloody brilliant, right? It'll give you an experience of a lot of different authors, because by its nature it switches between different authors, and then you get the sense of them. So like St. Augustine's sermons are sometimes in there. Like I think sermons to sort of lay audiences are really good, because if you've got a good preacher, he's going to be trying to put his language on a level that can be understood by the common man. So like maybe translations of St. John Chrysostom would be all right. I've heard that his Greek isn't too bad. So yeah, and then basically make your way up to the harder authors. So you want to start with the easier ones, and then you can graduate up to the slightly harder ones. Then you work your way up to the top. So at the top is probably something like, I mean, I've been completely obliterated by Saint Leo the Great. Reading the Office of Readings, I just can't understand it. And another one as well, the translation of St. Maximus the Confessor, like was like I couldn't even understand what he was saying. Right, like often I can get the gist. I couldn't understand a word of what Maximus was. Well, I could understand the words, but I just didn't understand Maximus at all. So that being said, we'll now talk about Greek. And this is where the interesting stuff comes in, because you're going to want to follow something similar. There are 2 books that I can confirm work. Also, first thing, don't get a Koine Greek book. Don't get one of these textbooks, because, well, first of all, they're almost to a man written by Protestants, and I'm a little bit skeptical. I've read one, and I was a little bit skeptical of one of their interpretations of it. The second reason is that if you're going to be reading theology generally, there's going to be a massive influence of Attic Greek on the fathers that you're reading. So, for example, I understand that Athanasius, St. Basil, and St. John Chrysostom, and Gregory of Nyssa and Nazianzus, these are influenced a lot by Attic. And so really, and to be honest, the content is actually just superior when teaching Attic Greek. Like, I would start with Attic textbooks. So this is Athanasde, as Scorpio Martianus calls it. I would get this textbook. This is book 1. It's like one of the interesting things I've noticed is that the Greek textbooks are a little bit more on the risque side than the Latin ones that I've encountered. So the Latin ones tend to be completely clean, like not even a hint of any kind of sexual stuff, right? Like this book has, there's a bit where they're kind of like talking about a friend who keeps having like children, and he keeps getting his slave pregnant as well, all right? So it's nothing worse than the Bible, but it's there, and so it's kind of. So that's something to be aware of. Also, they don't tend to leave much to the imagination when it comes to the artwork. Like, it's nothing outright pornographic. But you're going to be seeing a lot of frontal female nudity, or you see frontal female nudity at times in these books. Another one as well, which I think this is actually Koine, is Logos, Lingua Graeca Persi Illustrata by Cultura Classica. This is all right. One of the things for Greek is that the textbooks in Greek aren't as good as the Latin ones, and they'll often assume that you know Latin as well. So I think this is partly why Athanasi is a little bit more risque than say Lingua Latina Persi Illustrata, and it's because they're dealing with students who are older. And so what I would do is I would first of all go through Alpha with Angela, which is just a set of like nice videos that you can find online for and that teaches New Testament Greek specifically. I'd go through that whole lot. There's also a couple of them for Athanasi by Scorpio Martianus, who records like 5 videos just giving a very basic introduction to ancient Greek. And then what I would do is I would go through Athanasi, and I'd go through. I try and learn the texts, but if I find something just too difficult, like you got to read sometimes these chapters like half a dozen times to get them. Like if you're still having trouble, then just switch to another book, and then like go between Logos. Logos is going to be a lot easier. There's also like a full-on curriculum that Scorpio Martianus wrote on his channel Polymathy, which goes through a lot more books, but these books I don't have them, so I can't tell you if they're any good. But one thing that you can supplement with quite quickly, I think, especially if you get an English, like a lot of people, okay, actually this is important. I should have said this. This is the Italian version of Athanasi. The contents are in Greek and in Italian. So as you can see here, there's actually a lot of Greek. You might be able to see the Italian text there, right? Now, why am I, an English speaker who doesn't know a lick of Italian, reading the Italian textbook version of Athanasi? The reason is because it has a hell of a lot more words. And that means that I'm going to have my vocabulary strengthened, which means I'm going to be better able to go and read things, right? So what I'd recommend is get this. A lot of people will get the English Athanasi as well. Part of me wishes I did, but I would find some sort of online textbook that explains the grammar alongside it, and then just read through that as well. And then if you do that, go through these books. I'd get through about maybe 2/3 of each book before you do next. So for this has 16 chapters. There's a second book as well. I haven't got that. If you get to about chapter 8 or 9, that's fine. If you get to this has like 35 chapters. If you get to, call it, let me see, what's 20? This isn't very helpful. If you get like a decent chunk of the way through the book, maybe a little before chapter 20 on this, right? And you feel the need, you can get what are called readers' editions. Now this is a Zondervan Greek New Testament readers' edition. And what this does is it takes the biblical text. This is typically, very similar to the one you'll have your Bible translated in, and it will take the words that are less common, and it will gloss them at the bottom. So, it's not going to gloss words like the, because Greek has the word the. Is it going to focus again? Well, we'll have to struggle with this, I think. I don't know how I'm going to get this to focus again. If I go like, whoop. That's annoying. Okay, so it will take the words that are less common and gloss them at the bottom. It's not going to be words like the or and or Jesus, but it's going to be words like the ark or something like that if you're talking about the Old Testament. And you can go through this. I'd recommend starting, Protestant seminaries, they will start people on 1 John. I think this is sound. I think that people who are reading Latin as well from the Vulgate, I think starting with 1 John is a good idea. And then you can go and read, I think Mark is slightly, I mean, it could be that I started with John first, but when I was reading through Mark, I thought Mark was slightly easier than John. So you could read Mark, and then John, or you could read Matthew next. I'd leave Luke for a while. Luke is a more difficult one. And then if you want, go and read Revelation. Revelation isn't too bad. But you're also going to want these as well. And these are, there's a bunch of different readers' editions for the Greek New Testament, because it's a standard text of Protestant seminaries. But unfortunately, they don't teach the Old Testament. And that's where this comes in. This is a reader's edition of the Septuagint. And it comes in 2 volumes. This is the first volume. And it will contain a whole load of texts that are easier than parts of the Greek New Testament, and so you don't have to do something horrible like go through the 3 of the 4 Gospels and then try one of the Pauline epistles and get completely thrashed, because that's what could happen, right? So what you do instead is I would recommend getting the Septuagint as well. There's only one reader's edition as far as I'm aware, and then going through that as well in a similar way to how you would go through like the Latin one. So if we go here, we can see here, this is the order of the difficulties of the Septuagint and the Greek New Testament taken together. So the first few easy books, granted I had no issue with Genesis, which is in the second tier, are 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings. So I think that these are actually supposed to be 1st and 2nd Samuel, because the way that the Septuagint lists them is that they are... actually, let's find out. Oh, actually, maybe it's different here. Oh. Oh, I think I figured out what the essay is. I think that's Samuel. So for those who are still... I think there's nobody watching this at the moment. But yeah, essay 1 and essay 2 are Samuel. And so, the historical books and the Torah are going to be the easiest books to start with. for someone reading Greek. So you don't have to necessarily read them in this order again, but these are the easy ones. I think this is the Odes of Solomon, by the way, because that's not in Catholic Bibles at all. And then you work your way through that, and then you check out the more difficult texts as you go, or the easier theologians. So one thing I've heard recommended is there are similar readers' editions for the Apostolic Fathers. So these are people like Saint Ignatius of Antioch. You have, I suspect, you probably have a book called The Shepherd of Hermas in there as well. And these are relatively similar works to St. Paul in their difficulty, slightly above that. So when you finish with the Bible, it might be worth checking those out. You can also check out easier Attic works, like, for example, the Anabasis of Xenophon is considered an easier work, at least past the first book. And so you just crack on through those, and you sort of develop your way. Unfortunately, I can't offer as much help with Greek as I can with Latin, beyond saying that Greek is the harder work. It's harder because it's more grammatically complex, and there's also a lot more. It's more grammatically complex, I think, is probably the thing. There's, like, some people will say that there's more words in Greek than there are in Latin. That could be true, but it could also be the fact that they're ignoring the gigantic medieval corpus of Latin, which is where I think Latin really comes into its own. So, with that all said, I don't think there's going to be any questions. So, I think you'll leave you all to it, and I hope you find everything here useful. If you want access to the reading list from Justin Learns Latin, I've linked it in the description. And also I've got the difficulty list for the Vulgate, the Septuagint, Old Testament, and for the Greek New Testament down there too. Hope everything is working out for you all. Take care.